I want to apologize in advance to anyone who was at the daily mass this morning, because you're going to get the exact same homily that I'm preaching right now. Just a little bit expanded tonight because, it's a Sunday homily now as opposed to a daily homily this morning. So, this is certainly a very different Independence Day weekend than we're usually used to. I've heard a lot about the extravagant Forest Lake celebrations that happen. You make a whole 3-day festival out of it from what I've heard, and there's fireworks and stuff that happens on the lake and a festival, but we don't have that this year. There's no big celebration, and any sort of family celebrations that we might have are a lot more subdued if they're even happening at all. And we're in a country that's very isolated from each other by this pandemic. We're not able to be close to each other as we're used to doing on Independence Day. And we're also a country divided against itself right now, from politics, from all this civil unrest. It seems like we're just more and more divided and isolated than at least I ever remember in my short 25-year history. So we got to ask ourselves the question, is this a nation that's founded under God still? Is this sort of mess that we find ourselves in, is it salvageable? What do we do with this situation that we find ourselves in, where it seems like maybe we've forgotten about God as a country? Well, in our first reading, we hear some good news. The Lord is going to win in the end. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. Now, from sea to sea, that's talking about from the Mediterranean Sea to the Sea of Galilee, and from the river, that's the Jordan River, to the ends of the earth. That's going out east. They didn't know how far out east the world went back then, but that was kind of the bounds of the earth as the Israelites know it. They were saying that, the Lord will have control and dominion over the entire world. So, this includes also our own sea to shining sea that we have here in the United States, the Atlantic to Pacific, and although our big river isn't on the border of our nation, it kind of runs down the center of the Mississippi, it shows, our whole world is under God's dominion and care. And it's especially under the care of our Blessed Mother Mary. We have a long history of Marian patronage in the area that we now call the United States. Very early on, one of the very first European explorers of this area called the Mississippi River the River of the Immaculate Conception. This is in the 1500s. Very early on, we see this sort of devotion to Mary in our very own Mississippi River. Pope Benedict XIV, in 1754, made Our Lady of Guadalupe the patroness of what was then called New Spain. So that would have been most of the western United States and central United States. Unfortunately, we're on the wrong side of the Mississippi, so we weren't technically part of New Spain here in Forest Lake. We're, a couple miles shy of that. But most of the United States was placed under the patronage of of Mary in 1754. In 1946, Pope Pius XII made Our Lady of Guadalupe the patron of the entire Americas. And before that, the United States chose specifically the title Immaculate Conception, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, as our patroness in 1846. So, okay, Mary, what are we going to do with this patronage of Mary that we have here in the United States? How can she help us in our current isolated and divided situation? Mary leads us to Jesus, and it seems right now as if our country could use a little bit of Jesus. Don't you agree? Now, sometimes Protestants can misunderstand how we look at Mary, how we see Mary, how we view Mary. We don't worship Mary, we don't honor Mary for her own sake, but only because through Mary we're able to go to Jesus. Mary always leads us to Jesus. To Jesus through Mary is this common phrase of Marian devotion. Everything that we do going to Mary is ultimately going to Jesus. And so I think something that can be misunderstood is the sort of role of the Queen Mother. When we say that Mary is the Queen of heaven and earth, we don't mean she's like co-equal with Jesus. You got the king and the queen. No, Mary is the Queen Mother. She's the mother of the king. And the mother of the king in ancient civilizations and even, monarchies, in the medieval times, the queen mother had this very important role. She was an intercessor with her son, the king. We can see this with Queen Bathsheba going to King David with things that needed to be done in the kingdom of Israel. Bathsheba would go to King David with these requests, and David would grant them. And we can do this with Mary as well. We see in the wedding feast at Cana, we see the server approach Mary and say, "There is no wine." And then Mary goes to our Lord, and our Lord fulfills her request, because Jesus can't really deny his mother, now can he? So, the mother of God, Mary, she has the ear of our Lord. And so with this sort of knowledge of this, and knowing that Mary is this powerful intercessor, when we look around our country and we see all of this craziness going on, what can we do? We can go to Jesus through Mary and entrust everything to him through her very powerful intercession as our patron. She will always bring us to the Lord. Mary, the Queen of Peace, Mary, the Queen of Unity. And when we go to our Lord, we see in the gospel, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take your yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." When we bring our burdens to our Blessed Mother, she will place them at our Lord's feet, and he will allow us to rest in him. St. Augustine, this is one of my favorite lines of St. Augustine. Our hearts are restless until we rest in the Lord. Our hearts are restless until we rest in him. So when we look around the world and we see all of this unrest that's happening, we can turn to the Lord and say, I can get rid of all these anxieties that I have about what's going on. I can get rid of all these fears if I can rest in the Lord and rest in you. So, as we have a very interesting Independence Day for our country this year, as our country seems to be kind of on unstable ground, we can approach the Lord through our Blessed Mother, through this intercession of Our Lady of Guadalupe, through the Immaculate Conception, and place our fears, our anxieties, and everything at the feet of the Lord, and ask him to bring about peace and unity in our country, and to restore us to a place of peace and joy in our hearts.